Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and I'll tell you what, today's guest I have got so much respect for because this is someone who I think is incredibly talented. We are going to tap into his creative mind today, as well as his business mind. So let me tell you about today's guest. His name is Nick Hart. Nick is the founder of Opra, which is a result-oriented UX and SaaS growth agency. For those of you not familiar with these acronyms, UX is user experience, SaaS as in software as a service. Nick has close to 8 years of experience leading design and strategy for growth-driven companies. He audits, analyzes, and designs to deliver customer-centric experiences that evoke action and drive revenue, which every single one of us as entrepreneurs and business owner needs. So we're going to tap into the genius of Nick here today. Nick has helped deliver impactful work within green tech, logistics, sports, healthcare, fitness, and many more industries. I'm excited to learn from him today, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Nick Hart. All right, Nick, I am so excited that you're here with us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Really happy to be here.
Heck yeah. So I tease listeners just a little bit about your background. I wish that they could see your skills in action, but we're going to talk all about your website here today so that they can get those visuals. But take us beyond the bio first. Who the heck is Nick? How did you start doing all these amazing things that you do?
Yeah, totally. So I would say it all started back when I went to art school in 2016. I was a non-traditional student. Got out of high school, actually didn't know what the heck I wanted to do. Thought, that was a little scary and just trusted the process and waited around a bit, tried to do some research, and then always knew I was a little bit creative. And just so happens that there was a really great school in Detroit, Michigan called College for Creative Studies. And I went in there to learn a little bit about graphic design and start down that road. And it just totally blew open my whole world about really what it is to solve problems and to think about things in a more analytical sort of frame of mind. And I ended up studying in the Netherlands for a bit too with that. It was just a really crazy program that taught me so much about life and applying a process to everything I do. And so after that, I ended up in a couple agencies. I loved really creative work. I wanted to help multiple companies and different agencies and get a lot of experience, and did that for a few years, ended up at a full-time tech role as a product designer, and then really started listening to myself and what I wanted from life, and learned that I actually want more control over the things I'm doing every single day. I want to create a system that will enable me to have a healthier, happier lifestyle, get more gratification out of the skills that I've been learning. And really, that's where I'm at today. I went out on my own to start my own business, and I love every second of it. It comes with its trials and tribulations, but it's ultimately very rewarding. And so that's where I'm at today.
Yeah, I love that overview, Nick, because you are throwing out some word combinations that we don't frequently hear together, which are, you talk about going to art school, but then you talk about wanting to think analytically. I feel like as a society, we often separate the art and the creativity from that analytical side, but I think that it speaks so much to the type of work that you do, because first things first, I'm going to call you out here publicly on the air. You are incredibly talented from a design perspective. I'm so excited for listeners to go to your website at the end of today's session because it's beautiful. As soon as our team saw your work, we were just like, we need this guy's mind on our show. But what really stands out to me is you don't just talk about design. I think it's so fascinating how much of your work focuses on growth, focuses on user experience, not just the world of design, in a world where there's always that debate between UI and UX, and UI obviously can steal a lot of the thunder, but UX is so important. Talk to us about that distinction for people who have never maybe sat down and thought about their business through those two lenses of UI and UX. What are they? How do they fit together? How did you figure out where to place that importance?
Definitely, yeah. So for me, and you make a good point, that is so much the case where they're thought of in two different conversations. But for me, early on, I knew that to make really impactful work, it has to be thought of holistically. And I think that's what separates people that really can achieve a very high level of value deliver versus some people that maybe can still deliver value but aren't at the highest level that they could be. So for a UI, it's about what the interface looks like. And to your point, Brian, it's a lot about what you think of when you hear design. Oh, I know what this looks like. It was designed. It's maybe graphic design. It looks cool. It looks a certain way. It follows the brand guidelines. But then there's UX, which is a lot of maybe the ugly, or, maybe I don't think it's ugly, but a lot of what doesn't look as beautiful because it's skeletal frames. It's how the information goes together. It's what the user might do when they're completing an action. It's more of these words that you move through something and you're not really describing how it looks, you're describing what's being done. And so for me, I knew to make really impactful work, it has to be the merging of the UI and the UX. And I think a lot of people nowadays, they can sort of get into the industry and learn UX really well. UI, maybe you have an innate ability or you train for it. Like myself, I had to learn to get my craft really good. But I think ultimately it should be thought of holistically. And that's how the most amazing work is delivered and the most value is handed over to companies and people looking to improve their business. It's about that impactful work that can really draw on emotions, the emotional response when you see something that looks beautiful, but also it doesn't get in the way and cause friction or pain points. So the UX is really sound. So you can complete something really well, you can do a task really well, and it looks amazing. I think those are the things that really create just a world-class experience.
Yeah, and when I hear you say the word experience, and when I think at a really simplistic level about UX, user experience, I like to think of that quote, I'm a big sucker for quotes, that says, people won't always remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And when I think about my experience with brands, I'm going to shout out Tesla, for example. Anytime there's anything with my car that I need attention towards, I just open up the app and I can message with their service team, and they will actually come to me wherever I am. Obviously, they know where my car is, and they'll service my vehicle. That experience is so different from every other car that I've ever had. And regardless of what people say about Tesla, that's how they make me feel. And so I have such goodwill towards them. Nick, it's really easy to think simply with regards to our businesses and say, oh, our experience is my website. Let me focus on my website. And that's what we really focus on from both that design perspective as well as that experience perspective. When you think about user experience, though, what are the different elements that it touches? Because having gone deep into your work, it's far more than just a website to you.
Yes, definitely. So for user experience, obviously initially it's what am I feeling? Am I frustrated? Since you like quotes, Brian, I believe it was Dieter Rams, a really famous industrial designer, that said, good design is invisible. And I think of a doorknob. So a doorknob, if it's working right, you'll open the door and you won't really think too much about it. Maybe you think, oh, I love maybe some people think, oh, I love the coating or the material or the style of shape. A lot of people don't. If it's broken, on the other hand, someone's going to be trapped in a room or the door's not going to work and they're going to be extremely frustrated. So good user experience should, I think, bring attention towards the positive qualities, or it should sit into the background. So if something is helping you complete your task, or something that, it's solving a real problem in your day-to-day life. So maybe it's a task management application. You're doing it really well and it's helping you stay organized and you love it. It's not necessarily holding you back or disrupting your process. If it is, then maybe the UX needs to be improved. So I like to think of it in terms of, if it makes you feel good, that's really good. Visual actually is a bit of UX through the aesthetics usability principle, one of Jacob Nielsen's principles from Nielsen Norman Group. And visual design can make someone feel good, and then because of that, improve the user experience. So I think ultimately it should, something should feel good, it should work good, and it shouldn't really get in the way and cause friction.
Yeah, what an interesting perspective. Good design should be invisible. I've never thought of it that way, Nick, but you're right. It's what we all say, or at least what I say about iPhones, for example, is that they just work. Hand an iPhone to your grandmother, she will inherently know how to use the iPhone. So I think it's such a brilliant product. And you're right, there's a lot of design behind that, but ultimately it's that flow, it's that user experience that works. Talk to me about that, because I'm sure that you are even more frustrated than us normal people when it comes to the way that people talk about, I'll call out the entire field of conversion optimization right now, where all these marketers have convinced us that, if you have a green button over a blue button, it's going to increase your conversions and your opt-in rates by 12%. What's I guess you can either take it in a higher level way or go into the nitty gritty with us. What are the things that you actually look at? What are some of those gripes that you have that marketers oversimplify and maybe miss out on the bigger, more important things?
Right. So for me, being a graphic designer by trade, where I got my start, I always break it down to simple design fundamentals and also UX principles. So I didn't touch on them a second ago, but for instance, a button should look like a button. I think that's baseline table stakes. A button should look like a button. It shouldn't be tricking anyone. It shouldn't, if you hover over it, it should maybe light up or give some affordance that it can be interacted with. Some other basic ones are read paths. So most of the web, on the Western world at least, because we read left to right, top to bottom, it creates a bit of an F pattern, the way the eye moves through the page. So making sure buttons are in easy to read spots, they are aligned with text and all the normal things, that's sort of table stakes. And maybe some easy wins if they're not optimized. But yeah, I do think it is a little silly to start switching colors or things like this in sort of growth hacking. I do love the philosophies behind growth hacking, but I think ultimately you might need to do an A/B test or look at the difference in conversion after you make normal design decisions versus saying, I'm going to change this to try to think of something totally weird and different in hopes that it does improve conversions. So I would say making things usable and even talking to people too. You could have user interviews and just ask them what they think if they would have clicked the button. There's a lot of stuff you can do to take the guesswork out instead of essentially throwing some random decisions over the fence and hoping maybe this moves the needle on some key metrics.
Yeah, for sure. Calling out. I love it. We're throwing a little bit of shade on the traditional growth hacking strategies as well. But I think that you're so uniquely positioned because you work in the SaaS space. And SaaS, I think, has to be one of the most difficult and competitive environments out there because there are SaaS companies popping up in every industry every single day. And so with that in mind, Nick, with your growth hat on, what are some of those things that you've seen in real life? Whether it's because I'm going to ask you, our questions are going to focus in two different ways. I'm going to ask you about those 0 to 1 companies and then those 1 to 100 companies. What are those different avenues and considerations at those different growth stages? Because we always hear terms like the MVP. We've all seen the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world as they've grown from beginner products to now they're just a mainstream part of life. What are some of those considerations out of the gate for companies who are looking to grow? And then how do those change over time as they actually look to scale?
Right. That's a really good point. So it's totally different, or at least the traditional views. It's very different for a 0 to 1 company trying to get an MVP out to market, maybe trying to prove that there is a market fit for that product versus a company that's very well established that might have multiple revenue streams and having new MVPs for different features and things like that. So I think ultimately for the 0 to 1, you have to let some of those things go because we simply need to get a product to market. It should follow and adhere to all the basic fundamentals and keep all of that growth, the growth things in mind for it. But ultimately, we want to get something out there that can be iterated on. That might not be the final solution per se. It might pivot. We don't know. So I think you want it to be perfect at the beginning, but a lot of that does have to sort of be held off at the beginning for 0 to 1 products just to get something out there. Whereas on the flip side, a larger company, you're able to analyze a lot of different things in greater detail and granularity, go deeper into specific flows. And at that point, to the earlier question, that might be when companies are thinking of, oh, maybe the button color needs to be different. It's because the product has some weight in the market already and it's matured. And now we're looking at different ways within the system that could be improved. So they're very different. But I think what's interesting nowadays is a lot of companies, even at the bigger mature stage, are taking on, or at least they should be considering taking on this 0 to 1 approach where everything is thought of more as work in progress. So get it to market and then we think about it, and it might not be perfect. But at this point, we're starting to collect data. It's out there. We're hearing what the users think. We're seeing some numbers behind it. And then also we're following quickly with newer features or updates, because I think that ultimately takes a lot of pressure off of people too, that think this needs to be carried out and completed and then delivered, and it has to be perfect. And I think what a lot of people realize now is that's not the reality of everyone's situation. There's always going to be some things that could be improved. And I think if we just sort of remove that expectation that it has to be perfect, ultimately we can have a roadmap that carries out improvements and leads to a better product.
Yeah, I love that answer, Nick, because it's giving us some insights into that analytical side of your brain. You talk about, I think one of the key words in the way that you talk about this stuff is iterative. It's actually a mindset. It's an attitude towards the work that we're all doing in our businesses. It's funny. I think we all, when we start our businesses, we think we reach that point where like, okay, I can set it and forget it now. And of course, there's no such thing as set it and forget it in life, really. Relationships, business, fitness, everything needs to be maintained. And with that analytical hat on, I'm super curious. I think that an interesting part of your work is, it's a word that popped up the more I researched your business, is that audit. What does your analytical brain look at when you go into a SaaS company or any other company? Is there some sort of mental checklist where you're like, all right, let's look at their website, let's look at their welcome sequence, let's look at their new client onboarding? Where does your analytical brain go when it comes to auditing the existing state of a business?
Definitely, yeah. So for me, I think a lot of it has come with experience, where I can easily come in and identify key things like, oh, this is problematic, make a note of this could be improved. In the best case scenario, I have to, well, so that's maybe the worst case scenario. Worst, maybe not for me, I love doing it. Worst position for a company to be in is if I have to come in and there's just stuff left and right. Everything has issues, blatantly, alarming things that are affecting the experience, and it doesn't look like a modern company. It may even look like a company that shouldn't be trusted. There's a lot of things on the internet. You might get scammed nowadays. So some companies, if their product or website looks bad, that's what a lot of people might think, is that this is a scam. If it's the best case scenario, I come in and I think, okay, stuff is mostly good. We can start thinking of, are there extra steps muddying the flow, causing friction? And if that's the case, I can also pull open a heuristic analysis, which is what a lot of people do. Again, Jacob Nielsen has a list of these that are really easy to go through. Some of them they're just basic principles that can adhere good user experience to what somebody thinks and feels. Like one instance is, just to throw one example of this, is system feedback. So if you were to upload an image, for example, onto a piece of software, an app, and it might take a second, you want to see a loading indication, a little spinning animation, something that's saying uploading, so the user or the person using it knows the system is working. I'm getting some feedback. I am aware of everything that's happening behind the scenes even. It's working, it's loading, it's uploading. If it doesn't have that, for example, there might be, if it's a slow internet connection, there could be a long pause, 5, 10, 20 seconds. Someone's going to think that it's broken. They might try to refresh the page. It's going to end the action. It's not going to complete what they were trying to do. It could be very bad. So heuristic analysis principles can actually go a long way. But for me, I like to find some middle ground where I come in there, have some time with the application. It could be entering in. I typically will create an account and go through the onboarding process if there is one. I like to have a more populated version of an application where I come in and see a very dense view that some typical customers might be seeing and get a really good sense of that. And I just spend some time playing with it, feeling through things, completing tasks. And typically with that, I can get a really good list of improvements and things to move forward with that can really give the team a good sense of, okay, this is where we should go and make improvements.
Yeah, I want to call out every single listener, myself included here, Nick, because hearing you talk about, for example, one of those basic principles for you is feedback to the user. And I think about all of the entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs out there who are listening to us, and they may be thinking, Nick, I don't have things that happen on my website. I don't need a loading spinning thing on the screen so that people know that it's working. Well, I think about as a consumer in the real world, when you're on a delayed flight and you're sitting on the runway and the captain isn't coming on the intercom to keep you updated, you just sit there frustrated. Whereas if they come on every 10 minutes or so and they just give you a brief update, even if the update is that we have no updates, that still feels better. It is that feedback loop that you're right. It makes us feel like things aren't necessarily broken per se. And I think it's so important for all of us business owners. And I also think it gives us insight into the way that you think in strategic terms, which is why I want to ask you this, Nick, with your business owner hat on, part of your job, so to speak, is convincing companies and selling to companies, telling them, hey, focusing on this stuff isn't just good from a UX perspective. It's actually going to increase your bottom line. What are those conversations like? What's that messaging like for you to really convey this? Because it's work that you're incredible at and that you're super passionate about. But a lot of business owners, they, ready, fire, aim. Aiming is the last part of the equation. How do you shift and guide those conversations to focus on the stuff that will lead to growth?
Right. So I think it always comes back to their customer, their audience. If it, a lot of times the website is tied to revenue conversions. They might have a funnel where, they know X amount of conversions leads to a customer. If it's an application, then maybe the least amount of time spent doing a task leads to better ROI, return on investment for their customers, for the people using their application. And so if I can identify things that are closer to that bottom line, that are tied to those financial results, it's an easier conversation. So if a website, and I love designing websites, I love websites that are impactful and that are awe-inspiring and beautiful, but also that solve business needs. And if I see an opportunity and I see a website that could be improved, or maybe doesn't look so great, and it could really inspire a customer base to have develop brand loyalty and take charge and love that this company is offering a service to them, those are the areas that I'll focus in and have the conversation around that. Well, did you know that more people might respond to your brand if we redesign this or we make it look a little bit more modern? Did you know that the people using this application might actually come back to their manager and say, this is great, it's saving me a bunch of time, or somebody's already keeping record of this application has helped us do X, Y, and Z. I think those conversations are always where I like to stick with around that value deliver, because ultimately I love designing. I think creating beautiful work is rewarding in and of itself, but ultimately I also want to have businesses grow and I want to create value for them. I want them to be successful. So ultimately I am always thinking of, okay, it's a little bit more than design in the visual sense or just what I like to do. It's about creating something that does bring positive change to a business. And so, yeah, I think about all the time I think about those conversations of what leads to that point that's going to increase revenue or make their customers happier.
Yeah, it's funny hearing you talk about this. I can't help but think about all the companies that I experience on the consumer side of things. And more as SaaS companies come into the marketplace, I just feel like they're all starting to sound the same. And we could blame ChatGPT for this. We can blame the fuzzy feeling corporate-y language that so many of them feel like they have to do. But I think so much of it is that messaging is so hard because there's so much about all of our businesses that we want to convey. And Nick, our listeners know that we always ask our guests, what's your zone of genius? And part of what you wrote there is that you distill complex ideas inside these projects for businesses. What's that process like for you? Because SaaS companies all have a million things that they want to say, but I'm sure part of your process is sitting down and saying, okay, let's strip all the excess away. What is it that we have to focus on? How do you even begin to figuring out what's the essential stuff that must stay and what's the fluffy stuff that we can get rid of?
Yeah, I think so. I thought of sort of a SaaS growth framework that I was putting together, and it all started with aligning on the customer. And it has things like what are the problems being solved? What is the core value deliver of, say, a SaaS app? But ultimately, it asks who are the main customers, and it focuses all conversation around what do they need, what are they looking for. And I think, like you said, ChatGPT can make a lot of things very general and not very targeted. And so it's really having a clear understanding of your end users, your customers. What are they looking for? What problems do they want to solve? And just having the language around that so that they feel good reading through a website saying, okay, I can trust this company. They're not superfluous in their language. They're delivering value. They are telling me a problem that I have and I identify with it. And then they're also making me feel good. So I like to have a little bit of positivity in there. I think, good design makes people feel good. I think that does carry through into copywriting. It should and of course, industries vary. Some are more mature than others. And, you don't want to put exclamation points everywhere and have it all exciting all the time. But I think ultimately there is a sort of optimistic lens that should be used in copywriting. And at the end of the day, everyone's trying to help someone. And so it's like, to use a metaphor, I guess, reaching a hand out for help. It's kind of the copy is reaching a hand out to those potential customers and saying, I'm here to help you. I want you to feel good. I want to limit these problems. And I think that's probably a good point to just focus on for rewriting copy.
Yeah, Nick, it's fun for me to have these conversations with amazing entrepreneurs like you because I get to tap into your mind not only as a subject matter expert like we're doing here today, but also as a fellow entrepreneur. So I want to put your business in the spotlight for a second and talk to you as the business owner. What are the UX elements of Opra that you focus on? When you sit down with your executive hat on, what questions do you ask yourself to say, hey, are my prospective clients having the best experience possible? What are those elements that you focus on?
Right. Yeah. Great question. It is interesting approaching all of these values and fundamentals into my business. I want the customer to be really happy. And what I like to think of is my services are a concierge into the design world. So I am there helping you through the door and showing you things and explaining them and then delivering results or a certain end for the project. A lot of times you see nowadays people will just hire quick services like Fiverr or something. They just want something quick. And that's a big differentiator for what I do is it's really, I'm almost a therapist at times, but I'm here to say, okay, you have an idea. Let's talk through every bit of this. Let's work through it. Let's make sure everything that you have that might be a concern is addressed in that. And I will talk you through my professional approach, my expertise, and we'll get to that other side. And that way, there's a big relationship developed. I'm very, very much focused on the relationship with the clients. And it just so happens I'm a very positive individual. People tend to like working with me. I think I just love being around people, love helping people, and that definitely goes a long way. So I think ultimately it's making sure the customer's taken care of, that their experience and everything is focused on, and with those things in mind, it really just comes a bit natural to me to help people and to keep my own sort of user experience in my business processes intact.
Yeah, Nick, it's funny. You almost alluded to it in that answer there. Something about your work that I hadn't thought of before, which is business owners, businesses, if you're working more at the enterprise level, they're kind of married to certain things in their business. Whereas you walk in and you say, hey, we need to change this. We need to optimize this. We need to gear this for growth and marry it to the strategy. What is your approach to that? What are some of those things that you see business owners or businesses married to that from your perspective you say, and it's coming back to that concept of being in an iterative mindset. What are some of those elements that you say, guys, we can't be married to that? We actually do need to change that because as a fellow business owner, there are certain things that this is our baby. Our businesses are our life work and our passion. What are some of those things that you love seeing people let go of and iterate on and improve and optimize?
Yeah, I would say it does happen from time to time. It's challenging the status quo. Some people have just been doing things for so long that they never really questioned it. This is just the way it is. This is the way we've always done it. And sometimes it does help being that fresh set of eyes coming in, that third party that gives that neutral explanation of, here is my perspective, here is where I see things. I think also there is the sunken cost bias too, where there's been a time where I've come in and I've identified needing to redesign a very substantial part of a SaaS app, and the team has already been working on this thing for a long, long time. It would take a lot to start up a redesign. It would be a very big project. And it was almost like they were thinking, because of the amount of time invested already into where they're at now, it would be a losing proposition to redesign it. But the case was, well, no, actually, it's going to be a much bigger improvement. Your customers should see this difference. We actually need to halt the work where it is now. I mean, still working on it, but halt any new features with this existing iteration and start with a redesign that ultimately is going to be the new foundation going forward. So I think it's natural that there's those two camps of, this is how it's always been, and then we've already spent a lot of time into this. But I think ultimately it's the job of the designer or the person offering the service to sort of be that visionary and to inspire and encourage and say, have that vision of what this could be, because that's what we're aiming for ultimately, is how much improvement this is going to have once we do get over this initial hump.
Yeah, Nick, I'll tell you what, I'm going to call you out here on the air that I think you are such a rare blend of that vision as well as marrying it to that strategy. And you have the skills to back it all up and put together some really cool projects. So I so love what you're up to with your business, which I want you to talk about your business in just a second. But before we get there, I always love closing these episodes by asking my guests, what's that one takeaway you hope listeners get? With all the amazing things we talked about, you introduced us to some really high level UX design and UI design principles and fundamentals that we must consider for all of our businesses, whatever type of business or service that we have. What's that one takeaway? What's the one action or consideration that you hope everyone walks away and says, gosh, Nick really forced me to think about this or to do this?
Yeah, that maybe it's a little tough to wrap all this up into one, but also I don't think it is. I guess I would say ultimately it's having that passion, that purpose, and that drive for not being content with a current solution. I think we all should look at something and say, how could this be better? Ultimately, on both sides of the client and the agency fence, ultimately everyone wants it to be better. The customers even want it to be better because it will make their lives easier. So I think looking at something with that passion of, I love this. I want this to be better. How can I improve it? And then where can I meet in that middle ground to make sure that it does succeed? I think ultimately, if everyone looks at something with that passion and that purpose and that inspiration, then we will always have a good website or a good application out there.
Yeah, I love the way you sum that up, Nick. It's something that was unexpected for me ahead of today's session, is to really reveal and see in real time how much of your approach to all of this work really is that mindset. It just sounds to me like in so many ways you're open to all possibilities. It's not that, that cliche that we all hear about when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It sounds to me like you're more than happy to walk into a project or a business or your own business, not married to anything, and say what's best for the customers, what's best for this user experience. It's obviously such a key word behind today's session. So kudos to you for summarizing that so articulately and succinctly. And on that note, I obviously teased your business, Opra, quite a bit throughout today's episode. So tell listeners about what it is that you do, who you serve, and drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Cool. Yeah, appreciate it, Brian. So I launched a little micro agency called Opra, and it really is a one-stop shop that can deliver really amazing work, whether that's a website, a rebrand, a SaaS application, 0 to 1, or more mature companies as well. Ultimately, it's giving people access to really high-end and current and modern approaches in design. So that could be, making an application that looks as good as Uber does today. That could be making a website that just blows away your customers and has animations and things that make it feel really premium. Opera delivers those results so everybody can come away happy and really gratified with what they've gotten out of the design process. If you want to learn more, you can go to the website, Opra Design, that's opra.design. And you can see actually a lot of really cool new explorations too on our Dribble. All the social accounts are on the website. You can find them. Really fun, cool stuff. I'm always posting work and with the latest technologies that are really just there to make people happy, to impress people, to inspire people. It's all about inspiring people and making great work. So I think that about sums it up for me.
Yeah, I love that overview, Nick, especially because you constantly talk about how you want to make people happy. And I think that that's something that all of our work should do in the world, is make it a better place. And I think you are a shining example of that. So listeners, you know the drill. We are dropping the link to Nick's website down below in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning into today's website, into today's session. His website is opra.design. It's OPRA.design. Don't throw that .com on there. You can just go straight to opra.design. Find those links down below. We're also linking to Nick's personal LinkedIn if you want to reach out to him and just thank him for being so generous with his knowledge on the show here today. But Nick, on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been a real pleasure. A lot of fun.